Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Anthony DeSimone with his 16th edition of Penguins Pointers today. A lot to talk about, a lot to cover about the Penguins, lots going on in the NHL as well, so let's jump right into it. Last three games for the Pittsburgh Penguins, 2 wins and a loss. 4-1 victory over the New York Rangers, a 4-2 loss to the Calgary Flames, 6-1 victory against the New Jersey Devils. Let's go through and break these games down a little bit. Rangers, the Penguins took control of this game after Henrik Lundqvist decided to be a child and knock his own net over because he didn't like that the ref didn't stop play to make sure he was okay, which I understand Lundqvist's frustration. You know, he ended up not returning to the game in the following period because of an injury, but there's better ways to do that. Take the shot, smother it. There was a shot coming on net when he flipped his net over. He could have smothered that and just simply gotten the whistle and then got the attention he needed. But the way he handled himself was just immature and one of the worst things I've seen in the NHL this season from any player. Regardless, the Penguins walked away from a 4-1 victory. Good command over the Rangers. They finally break the, guess you could say the curse of the New York Rangers, that they could not beat them for the longest time, or they'd struggle with them so much. That was a good win for the Penguins to get that little burden off their back, which was great until they played Calgary and decided not to show up against a team that's struggling right now. Calgary Flames are pretty much out of the playoffs, and the Penguins did not take advantage of an opportunity to get 2 points. Instead, they flopped on their face, fell to them 4-2. Honestly, did not look like they were in the game at all from the get-go. It just looked all Calgary. But Fleury didn't look as great, and the defense was like Swiss cheese, I guess. It could have been a lot better. They weren't really helping Fleury out, so just the defensive breakdown against Calgary led to that loss. We go to the third game here, New Jersey Devils. Penguins got good command in the first period thanks to Mr. Sestito, who came up from the minor leagues and decided to start picking fights with people. And we'll talk about that in a little bit with the next bullet point. But that was basically the turning point that tilted the tide in the Penguins' favor the entire day. As from then on out, the Penguins scored 2 quick goals and ended up with a 6-1 victory over the Devils, who were honestly never in it. So, good for the Penguins. Overall, besides Calgary, some nice production from the Penguins after the last couple games, so looking good. In terms of the next point, need to play a psychological game. The Penguins are not a big team. They don't have a hitter. They don't have a bully to go out there and start hitting players when stuff's not going their way. What the Penguins do have is the ability to get in the heads of their opponents and make them take penalties. And I want to go back to what Sestito did in the New Jersey game. Went up against, I think it was 2-2. During the face-off, and he was just getting in his head. They started chapping, yelling at each other and slashing sticks and bumping into each other, and ensuing face-off comes, and Tutu just had enough of Sestito, and he went after him, took his gloves off, and started wailing on Sestito for about 5 to 10 seconds. Regardless, both players got 2-minute penalties for the instigating and the roughing, but Sestito, because he took his glove or didn't take his gloves off, caused Tutu, who did take his gloves off, to get an additional 2-minute penalty and give the Penguins a power play. And that's what I was talking about. He got in the head of Tutu and took him off his game, made him make a mistake and take a penalty. The Penguins were able to tilt the ice from then on out, and it was all Penguins the rest of the day. And that's what I think the Penguins need to do. They're not a big team in the NHL. If they go up against the Capitals, the Blackhawks, or the Rangers, who are big in size, they're just going to get run over. The Penguins need to play the more psychological game, get in their heads, make them hit you at inopportune times that take penalties instead of giving a good hit, and that gives the Penguins a power play opportunity. That's what I think the Penguins need to do, and I think it'll help them be successful, especially in this wild and wonderful last month of hockey that we have left. Jump down to the next bullet point. The bottom forwards keep producing, and they need to keep producing. Scott Wilson, Tom Kuhnhackl, Brian Rust with his speed. Just their efforts are making the game easier or a little bit easier, for players like Crosby and Kessel and Malkin, because now teams have to respect these players on the bottom lines and not just gloss over them and focus on those three, your top stars all day. So that's getting Crosby, Malkin, and Kessel and other top players for the Penguins open and scoring opportunities, and that's why you're getting production from both the top and bottom lines, is because they're all producing about the same effort each time they go out on the ice. So it's nice to see that. One thing I'm concerned about is Bo Bennett should be coming back from an injury, and Eric Fehr should also be coming back from his injury shortly. I'm concerned that the Penguins are going to make this decision to start jumbling around their lines, and as we all know, when the Penguins start jumbling around their lines, we stop winning because you start changing things. I think currently, with what the Penguins have in terms of the smaller minor league guys up in the NHL playing, and the top-tier NHL talent on the top lines, I think the Penguins have a good mix of players that should be able to carry them into the playoffs and possibly through the playoffs a good bit. So I think the Penguins leave it the way it is. Leave Scott Wilson, Tom Kuhnhackl, Brian Rust. Let them have their positions they've earned on the ice this season as we move closer to the playoffs. And no disrespect to Eric Fehr, Bo Bennett, but you guys can enjoy the bench, if you will. But just my thought. Every time the Penguins change up their lines, it backfires, and they lose, and they struggle, and it just becomes painful to watch. And I'm sure it's not any less painful for the team themselves as they're fighting for playoff spots. We haven't locked up a wild card spot yet. There's still a lot of hockey left to go, 15, 16 games left. So if there's any Penguins listening to this, I urge them, or anybody from the Penguins organization, I urge them, do not change the lines. I think they'll work well the way they are. They are working well the way they are. I think it's more or less you got to start playing that psychological game. And the last point down the bottom, which I'll jump into, is defense, defense, defense. 18 shots for the New Jersey Devils. That's all they had, and they only had one goal. That's the kind of defense the Penguins must have against everybody as we move on in the last month of hockey, because everybody's going to be bringing their A game. Everybody's going to bring everything they have to the ice. The Penguins need to bring their top defense like they did against the New Jersey Devils. That was one of the best defensive games I've seen out of the Penguins all season, and I hope they keep it that way and learn from that as they bounce back from that loss against Calgary. So the defense is important. As defense leads to offensive opportunities, when you have players like Carl Hagelin, Brian Rust, and Phil Kessel who are very quick on their feet, they can sit a little further down in the defensive zone and still get a breakaway if the opportunity arises. So I think defense first, let the offensive opportunities come. So just my thoughts of the last three games and some other things to consider as you're watching the hockey games in the last month of the season. But let's jump over to the standings. First team to rack up 100 points. There it is, the Washington Capitals. Gotta love them. But they are the first team to have 100 points. I can almost guarantee you now at this point with how many games are left, nobody will catch them. My thought on that is if you can't beat them, beat them. And what I mean by that is start hitting them. Start trying to take players out and weaken them up for the playoffs. Some of these bottom teams that are out of the playoffs, or some of these teams that are going to be facing off against the Capitals come playoff time, need to get in there. Don't worry about the win. Worry about roughing them up, because you need to knock them down a peg or two. That's good for them. If they win and get 120 points in the regular season, that's fantastic. But if they get into the playoffs banged up and bruised, they'll be just as easy as an 8 seed to take out of the standings. So I say you go from trying to beat them to physically trying to beat them, because at this point there's no way to catch them. There really isn't. Even the top team in the West, who I think is Chicago at the time, has 85 or 87 points. Just mathematically, it's almost impossible to catch them. So at this point, just let them have, the President's Trophy for the best team in the NHL this season. But moving down the standings a little bit here, Rangers have 82 points, Islanders 79, Tampa Bay Lightning, a 9-game winning streak has propelled them past the Panthers, who are struggling as of late. So the Lightning have 82 points, Panthers have 80, Bruins have 79 to hold on to the third spot in the Atlantic. The Penguins, with their recent victories, and Red Wings having their struggles as they lost to Chicago twice in a row, have now fallen to the 8th seed as the Penguins cover the 7th seed with 76. Red Wings have 75. We jump over to In the Hunt section. Keep an eye on the Flyers. Flyers are doing well as of late. 6-3-1 in their last 10. Gives them 71 points. Hurricanes, Devils, and Senators all round out the next 3 spots, all with 69 points respectively. Canadians clinging on to that last In the Hunt section with 66 points. And if I remember correctly, we'll go back on some of the previous blogs I said the Devils were going to be a flop, and I said the Hurricanes and Flyers would be the teams to watch for, and even the Senators are dangerous. So, the Devils, I think, and the Senators, unless they have a fantastic run at the end of the season, they have already played 2 more games than the Penguins and Red Wings. So that puts them at a 4-point disadvantage because they've already played 2 more games. But Hurricanes and Flyers definitely still alive. The Flyers actually have 1 game in hand on the Red Wings and Penguins. And in fact, the Penguins have to play the Flyers 3 more times before this season comes to an end. They will play the Flyers on March 19th. They will play them twice in the last week of the NHL regular season. They will play them on April 3rd and then April 9th, which is the absolute last game of the season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. This is something that Penguins fans need to watch out for. The Flyers, as we all know, are an Achilles heel to the Pittsburgh Penguins. There are 6 points up for grabs still between these 2 teams. The Penguins have to take 4 of those points. If they don't take 4 of those points, this is going to become very interesting come the last week or 2 of the NHL regular season, because that will give the Flyers an opportunity to knock the Penguins out of the standings. But there's a lot of other games going on before we get to the Flyers, but just something to think about. The Flyers still have to face off against the Penguins 3 times before this season comes to an end, so they still have a pretty decent shot at knocking the Penguins out of the playoff spot. So, speaking of games coming up, let's talk about the next game. Tomorrow night, 7:30, New York Islanders. Penguins are chasing the Islanders, trying to cap off and get that 3rd Metropolitan spot. This would be a great opportunity for them as they play the Islanders this week, and I believe they play the Islanders again next week. So 4 points up for grabs in the next week between these 2 teams. Islanders currently are 36-20-7. Like I said, 79 points, 3rd in the Metropolitan. My tips to win against the Islanders: very physical hockey team, defense first. Play a strong defense like the Penguins did in New Jersey. They shouldn't have a problem there if they can play strong defense. A strong start is also something the Penguins need. Get off and get those 2 goals like they've had recently. They've put up 2 goals against the Devils in the first 10 minutes of the first period and really quieted the Devils and the fans. That's what they need to do against the Islanders. Same thing. Get them early goals, get an early lead, and then play their game. Don't play the Islanders game. Play the Penguins game. And what I mean by that is you start to take control of the ice. You control the tempo of the game. That's what needs to happen. Get the lead and then control the tempo. And the third thing, draw penalties. There's still a little bit of anger and rivalry between the Islanders and Penguins, so this will be a rough and tough hockey game, in my opinion, what I think is going to happen. So the Penguins, like I said, play that psychological game, get in the head of the Islanders, and make them make mistakes and take penalties to give you power play opportunities for a power play that has been doing decent as of late. Not great, but it has been doing well. So that's my 3 tips to win for this game. Last thing I want to talk about today, this is the first of 8 games against divisional teams for the Penguins. These next 8 games are going, in my opinion, will determine if the Penguins make it or don't make it in the playoffs this year. This is, in my opinion, the biggest opportunity for the Penguins. There's 16 points up for grab against divisional teams. teams like Columbus, Philadelphia, the Rangers who we're chasing, the Islanders who we're chasing. I believe we play the Devils again. And there's one other team that's skipping my mind that I know we're going to end up playing. This is the opportunity for the Penguins to rack up some Metropolitan points and propel themselves into one of the top 3 spots in the Metro. I think if they struggle here in their next 8 games, it's going to be real interesting when it comes the last week of the NHL when we face off against the Flyers twice. So I think the Penguins need to get them points. They need to take at least 10 points here. At least 10 points. I'd like to see 12, but if we can win 5 of the next 8, that would be great. So, but time will only tell. Hopefully the Penguins do bring their A game to the ice and don't have another Calgary game where, fans are sitting there ready to throw their beer bottles and cell phones and whatever else you have in your hands, the remote, at the TV with how poorly they played against a bad team. Because if that happens against any of these teams like the Rangers and Islanders that the Penguins are chasing, those teams will clobber. They will clobber the Penguins. I can guarantee you that, because they are fighting just as hard as the Penguins to maintain their spot in the playoffs, and they don't want to give that up. The Islanders and Rangers have been holding on to the 2nd and 3rd spots in the Metropolitan this entire hockey season, and they are not ready to give up those spots to the Penguins yet. So, going to be a very interesting week and a half of hockey as the Penguins are playing divisional teams and foes. So, only time will tell, like I said. As for now, I'm done. Hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I will be enjoying the weather outside. As you guys all know, Pittsburgh in the month of March is a very wild month, and I will take the 60s and 70s that are on tap for this week in the Pittsburgh region, so hopefully you guys will as well. But don't forget, tomorrow night, 7:30, the Penguins will be facing off against the Islanders, so make sure you get that sun soaking before the hockey game. As for me, please like and subscribe to the channel and video. Thank you guys once again for listening in, and I will catch you guys next time. Take care.